What the f***'s our topic? So with all of these current gen games coming out and the ones that are focusing on all of these things from shooting to everything else, all of them seem to be focusing on a multiplayer aspect. So do you guys feel like it seems like it's necessary for developers to put out games with an online aspect in order for them to be successful?
I mean, maybe a little? Because now we're seeing, like, at the beginning of every console generation, we see people try and just exploit the technology, and sometimes that works really, really well. Sometimes we get examples like The Order, where The Order was 6 hours, like
of
two or three of nothing, 2 or 3 of it was a game, but there was nothing to do afterwards. Multiplayer is, unfortunately, a really easy replay value. There are games that add on multiplayer, it's not good, but you can play it a lot. There's a lot to do in it. So I think for developers that are afraid of, people that might wait for it to get cheaper or possibly go buy it used at GameStop or whatever, it's a very easy way to get immediate sales before reviews come out and people go, oh, it sucks, and then, damage control.
Well, multiplayer is more of a recent thing if you really think about it. It only came out when the PlayStation 2, Xbox, like one.
I mean, that's not exactly
first
recent.
Xbox. Well,
It's about 20 years. Not quite.
We're talking about,
I understand.
There's games way before that were just like strictly like single player, and it survived until then. So you can still make decent games that basically found their foundation on like Mario. Mario built itself up from like a single player aspect and it's built itself up from there. So you don't really need multiplayer to make a successful game, but it certainly helps afterwards, like he was saying, for replay value and for just additional content afterwards.
But see, even there, like, Mario's gone to multiplayer too, because the best game recently on the Wii U has been New Super Mario 3D World, where the big thing was multiplayer. And it's been other games, but it was usually like you pass up. Now it's everyone playing together, which we see in current multiplayer models. So even that's kind of like changing.
What kind of games are you playing, Izzy?
I play any type of games, but I feel like if we're talking about sports games, you need that multiplayer value because people like playing against each other and there's a lot of competition. And if I'm playing a sports game, I want to play against somebody because there's more competition and not just against the computer because that's not really fun. But then you got games like Batman. I have no problem with Batman. I have a multiplayer. That's great. I can replay Batman story mode over and over and over again. I think it really just depends on what type of game it is. For real.
So games like, I agree, with something like a sports game that makes sense. Nobody wants to be playing baseball with a computer for 4 hours. It's more fun when you have someone that's unpredictable. So a game like, if you go back to like Red Dead Redemption, for example, which had one of the best single player modes, did you think that with something like that is so single player story driven, it needs a multiplayer?
See, it doesn't need it, but at least there, the reason that works, because the multiplayer is great, it had an interesting idea where it's like, let's take the open world aspect, but bring it to the multiplayer. Because it wasn't like, there were little skirmish, team deathmatch encounter things you could do. But you could also just roll with a posse of 3-4 friends online and have this unique experience in this open world. Not that many games can do that, really, and that's a great idea, and that's why it works there. Take a game like Batman, like Arkham Origins, add a multiplayer, it felt completely opposite of the way the single player works, so it just felt like a very tacked on, added thing.
This is Last of Us 2. Had great story, great singular campaign, but then had multiplayer tacked on, which didn't really get a lot of notice, but it was actually pretty solid in its gameplay and all the little neat mechanics that had the crafting and stuff you could do in games. So like you didn't know what the other guy was gonna have. He could like throw a Molotov or a smoke bomb at you. You just didn't know. But like games like Call of Duty, of course, have seemed to be like more, instead of the single player oriented, the more multiplayer oriented now.
So would it be better for games? I've actually honestly liked the single player campaign modes of the Call of Duty series rather than Battlefield ones, which are depressing. But at a certain point, do you guys feel like it would be better to just completely get rid of the single player mode and go back to a game like MAG, which was specifically a multiplayer game?
You can do that, but Titanfall has done it. It's only multiplayer, even though they say there's a campaign. It's not really a campaign in it, but literally, you have to have enough content in the multiplayer. That's what the problem with Titanfall is. There wasn't enough maps and stuff. If you're going strictly multiplayer game, you have to have a crud ton of maps. You have to have like a bunch of guns. Like you have to have enough there to say this is worth $60. This is worth a full game that would have a single player campaign along with maybe all these additional features. If you're just going multiplayer, you have to have enough content there. And that's the problem we're seeing, is that a lot of if they're doing that whole just multiplayer thing, they're not throwing enough content in there at the first, and people are like, well, there's not enough there. It's like Evolve doesn't have enough content in it. It's like Titanfall, and that's why people get bored with it, because it might be good, it might be unique, but there's just not enough there for them that latch onto that game.
See, I want to counterpoint the Evolve thing, because I actually think that Evolve is a really good example of a game that if they were more confident in it, would be a great example of why multiplayer works this generation. Because Evolve, there's not a lot of content there, true, but the core gameplay...
Until you spend $150 on the other content.
We're not going to talk
That's
about that part.
Story.
Other than that, the
the
actual
first day
core
it came out,
gameplay,
yeah.
the hunters versus the monster gameplay, is really engaging. It's really fun. They didn't need a single player campaign part. They didn't need to have some kind of offline mode or whatever. It could have been just online multiplayer like Titanfall was and worked. But they were getting pressure and they weren't confident enough in what they had already made. So let's tack some stuff in. And all the reviews you see, they go, hey, this single player offline thing or whatever, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, because when I'm getting into a game and I'm playing the story mode, when I first get a game, I want to get into the story mode and try to go through it. And when I'm playing it, it's when I'm finished, I want to be able to go back to it and finish all the side missions and all of that. Because sometimes when you go through it, you're not going to just stop by. You're trying to go through the story mode and get to the end of it. But then you go back and you get certain type of weapons or different quests that you can do, and you can finish off of that. So, I mean, I feel like if they focus on the single player, the story mode is just really an added bonus, and it extends the life of the game.
Yeah.
Even if the story mode is crap, though?
Yeah, I mean...
Because, I kind of, to an extent, I do kind of see it in a way as a tutorial, because I'd rather kind of get a hold of the controls and how the game works than just jumping straight into multiplayer and getting my butt whooped.
Yeah.
But
That sounds kind of like what Destiny was going for originally, was that whole experience in single player, and you going through and you getting the weapons and everything, and then using it in multiplayer as an addition. I earned this, so I get to use it in multiplayer. And then it kind of just devolved into the chaos, and we ended up with that.
funny part is I actually try my best to avoid the multiplayer aspects of Destiny. So that's an interesting one.
I mean, even look back as far as Bungie's, their first game, their first really big game was Halo.
Which has incredible multiplayer.
It has incredible multiplayer. You could just play the single player, and the single player is really, really great. But that kind of game design stuff, we haven't really gotten as much of this generation. Because multiplayer becomes this bigger focus, and now single player is kind of faltering.
It seems like the companies are focusing, because we are in such an era that everyone wants to be playing the multiplayer, that they know that, and they're putting all this effort towards it. But it does kind of leave the ones like us feeling shafted when we do enjoy a good single player campaign mode, and we enjoy having something that goes on, because sometimes it's something as simple as your internet's not working, or you're just not feeling up to whatever, you just want to go to it, and sometimes you do feel let down.
But I feel back to Evolve, if Evolve had a very good written story and had this interesting storyline about the monsters and why they're there on the planet, and the struggle of the people trying to live on the planet, it would have been a lot more interesting, and people would still probably be playing it in droves instead of just no one's really playing it anymore, because it's literally here's multiplayer, it's really cool, it's good concept. It's this whole monster hunt thing, but then there's nothing to go. You don't get attached to the monsters. The monsters look cool, but it's just what's the story behind the monsters?
Yeah, I mean,
there is no story. What's the story behind the characters? Yeah. There's no really story. You can't really feel attached to the people you choose, and that's why it kind of just dwindles off.
See, I think the big thing with that though that we should look at is Evolve. They started talking about story a few weeks before the game came out. So that's already a really bad sign. Yeah. Before then, there was no story. It was a scenario. Alien planet, evil monster, hunters trying to stop it, monster trying to live and kill them. That's a great scenario. A lot of games have great scenarios. It's a big risk to go from we have the scenario to no, we have this story, we have this tale we're going to tell you. A lot of people really don't in the industry. But if they can focus more on saying, hey, we have this great scenario, let's back up with great gameplay, that's enough.
I think it's companies have these great, like you're saying, they have these great ideas, but they're just not implementing them well. And essentially what it leads to is us as gamers kind of feeling let down on both aspects. But I think we can all agree that hopefully in the coming months, with these new games coming out later in 2015, we've been disappointed, but I'm really hoping, and I think we can all agree, that I'm hoping that the next coming games will have just as good of the campaign modes that they're offering as the multiplayer. So I guess we'll just have to sit tight and wait.